Hello, everyone.
Hi, Kara. This webinar is called Creating Measurable Outcomes and is provided by the Pathways Project through the support from Houston Community College and the Houston Endowment. Our presenter today is Kara Larkin Skinner. Kara is the Director of Institutional Research and Institutional Effectiveness at Amarillo College. However, in just a few weeks, Kara will join Our Lady of the Lake University as the Director of Institutional Research. She has over 10 years of experience in the fields of evaluation, assessment, and research. During her tenure at Amarillo College, she was integral in launching assessment of general education competencies, advanced the culture of data-driven decision-making, and was active in all areas of assessment and research. Kara received her bachelor's and master's in psychology from the University of Louisville. She is currently working toward her doctorate in higher education administration at Texas Tech University. Additionally, Kara is an active member of the National and State Associations of Institutional Researchers. She participates in numerous committees related to institutional research and assessment within these organizations. Finally, Kara is an adjunct faculty in the psychology department at Amarillo College. Please welcome Kara Larkin Skinner.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to get set up here. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I wanted to first thank Ginger for making this webinar happen, and she's been extremely helpful and valuable to me. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know especially this time of year is extremely busy for all of us. So thank you for taking time out to come and listen to an assessment webinar. Very quickly, can you all hear me okay? Could you possibly type in the chat window yes or put a smiley face? Okay, thank you. I'm actually going to close the chat window, and Ginger's going to monitor that. So today we're going to discuss measuring and assessing student pathways to success, and specifically we're going to focus on how to develop measurable outcomes. You will notice that you have handouts on your chat screen on the left side of the window. There's a paperclip option, and that's where the handouts can be found. The handouts for this webinar are the actual PowerPoint. And this screen will show you, there's going to become a time where you're going to need to hide your chat bar in order to see all of the information that's displayed. And so this window is telling you how to do that. Between the two, I'll have to bring mine back. Between the chat and the PowerPoint, there's a small blue arrow. And if you choose that, it will hide the chat, which will make your screen larger. So I always feel it's important to attempt to practice what you preach. And since I'll be talking to you all today about goals and outcomes, and because I just happen to be a very goal-driven person, I like to start off any presentation I do with my goals. So today's goals are that I'll provide you information on how to write a measurable outcome statement. And my hope is that you will walk away with an understanding of a practical model on how to develop direct and measurable outcome statements. Also, that you'll be able to develop measurable outcome statements and then evaluate the quality of the plan. I'd like for you to be able to determine whether the plans that you've considered doing or that you are doing are the type of quality that you want or that you could reach. And something that I feel is important, some of you may be very advanced with regard to outcomes. And so for those of you who are more advanced, this just provides an opportunity for you to reflect on your project and whether your outcomes are meaningful to you and if you're on the path that you should be or want to be on. And I'd also like to comment that I've seen some of the work that some of you are doing, and I think you guys are on a great great path, and you're already doing excellent and rigorous assessment in some cases. So for those of you who are already doing this, today's webinar may actually just confirm that you're on the right path, and to me that's always valuable as well. This slide is just a visual representation of the flow of today's presentation. This represents the process and the steps that I'm going to go through with you. It's important to note that robust and measurable outcomes are contingent upon strong purpose statements and clear project goals. I was asked to speak to you guys directly about developing outcomes, but I could not find a way to just jump right into outcomes without starting at a broader perspective from a bigger picture. And so I incorporated this in here just to focus on what I have called in the past purpose statements. But for you guys, this is probably your mission statement. A good purpose statement or a good mission statement will align with your program's mission, your values, your vision, core purpose, and strategic goals. It should identify the reason for your program's existence, and it should be updated as the program evolves. Typically, purpose or mission statements don't change very often. We do typically have one mission that we are trying to achieve, so they don't change very often. Whereas later in the presentation, I'm going to go over goals and outcomes that are items that do change more often. So I provided just a quick sample purpose statement. It's pretty simple and relatively broad to provide a pathway for student success from high school into college. So you can have a complex mission statement or you can have a very simple mission or purpose statement. But the idea is that, it's pretty broad and it is where you want to go. It's your kind of overall mission, if you will. So you'll notice throughout the presentation that I placed several what I'm calling reflection slides into the presentation. I did this to encourage you to think about or reflect on the current work that you're doing. Take a moment and just think about where you're going, how are you doing, and what's it going to take for you to get there. I'd also like to note that, let's switch back. Let me stick to the slide here. If you'll consider the reason why your project exists, and if you look at the questions on the actual slide, would you be able to explain why your project exists to an administrator? Do you think people on your campus understand all of the services that your project offers? And could you describe the need your project fills and the audience it serves if you needed to, say, a funding agency? Could you do it in less than 5 minutes? So in a perfect world, if you have a very strong purpose statement, your answer to these questions would be yes. And if you find, as you were reflecting on this, if you found that you would struggle answering some of those questions, it may be time to either refamiliarize yourself with your purpose statement or possibly rethink it completely. Okay, so I felt it would be fun, maybe fun for me, not for you, to start off with a pop quiz. So your first question, and I'm switching to that right now, is what is the Pathways purpose statement? And so here, throughout this presentation, there's a series of polls, and hopefully you can all see the poll now. And if you just check the radio button next to what you believe is the Pathways purpose statement. On this one, you will need to expand your chat window in order to see the poll in its entirety. Okay, it looks like there's a few people who are still rethinking their answers. I think some people are changing now that they have seen others' answers. And I'm switching back to the presentation now, so last chance to get your answers in. About 90% of you chose the first option, and you would be correct. So I put this in here as somewhat of a trick question, but you all did great, and it appears that you are very familiar with your mission statement. But what I have found when working in assessment over the years is that oftentimes we don't actually know what our mission or our purpose is. We tend to get bogged down in our day-to-day details, and we don't take time to step back and reflect about the bigger picture and our bigger purpose. So now that we've talked just a minute about purpose statements, let's get into the next level. Once you have a clear purpose statement, you can start to form goals. In order to form goals, you need a few things to happen. To me, this is one of the most important pieces in outcomes, purpose statements, and goals, and that's that they should matter to you. Sometimes we are actually assigned goals. So it is possible that you may have a goal that is assigned to you and you struggle to make it meaningful to you. When you're in that situation, look for ways to work within the parameters that have been set for you. Try to be creative and find ways to still make that goal meaningful to you. But if you're free to set your own goals, then choose goals that are meaningful or that matter. Choose things that you're passionate about. Goals should always be broad and general expectations of the project, and they need to be based on the purpose. Sometimes we, myself included, have pet projects or projects on the side that we feel very important about, and we try to find ways to, fit those in when they don't really fit. So it's time to be realistic about that. Make sure you're not on a pet project. Make sure your goal works with regard to your mission and purpose. When you're forming goals, this is a great time to step back and reflect, think about the key challenges or problems that you would like to assess or you'd like to improve in. Goals are typically, and I could not find a better way to kind of define this, but they're in between short-term and long-term. You shouldn't be able to fix a goal or resolve it in 1 year's time. But they should be a more immediate need. You don't want to look 15 years out into the future for a goal. And so typically they fall between 1 to 5 years and a current issue. Recently I heard this term, destination goals, and I really liked it and felt like it was applicable here. What a destination goal is that our destination is not going to change despite environmental changes. Let's say your funding falls short, or you've got a team of personnel you work with on these Pathways projects, and 75% of your team leaves for some reason. Your goal should not change in spite of those situations. When we talk about outcomes in a minute, outcomes are more sensitive to the environment, and so funding and personnel can have a major impact on those. But on our goals, our destination should not change, even if other issues do. So this slide, I just kind of put together some very brief sample goals. And I'm not actually going to read each one, but, just take a look at these examples. Increase the number of college-ready students in math. If you step back and reflect on that, the goal is relatively broad. It fits, hopefully, within your purpose or your mission statement. And hopefully this is meaningful to you all. It is a current issue. It's something that could be addressed in 1 to 5 years. And it allows us to work within it to create a measurable outcome, which is what we're really going to get into today. And some of the others, improve student writing or prepare students for college-level math. So here's another reflection slide. Consider what are some of your challenges or even problems that your project has. Do you have obstacles that keep you from formulating goals or obstacles that keep you from achieving goals? what are some of those big obstacles? Are they accessible or measurable? Can you do anything about them? And are you willing to address them for the purpose of positive change? Some situations that I've encountered when dealing with goals and outcomes are that, it's great to tackle your big obstacles, but sometimes they may not be accessible or measurable for various reasons. If you have a goal but you cannot assess or measure it, that's not really the best. It's not the best use of your time to focus on that. You want to find something that you're going to be able to assess or measure. And another thing that I think is very important is, can you actually do anything about it? I had an instance one time where someone, their goal was to change a completely separate department. They wanted to do something about a totally different department. Well, they had no control or no interaction. There's really nothing they could do in that situation. So that's not the best choice for a goal either. And then one that we encounter frequently is, are you willing to address this for positive change? Sometimes there might be a situation that is frustrating to us and we kind of stew on it, but in the end, what we're doing with assessment is trying to change things for the better. So if you think about your goal and you think about what your end result might be, if your end result comes out bad, let's say, are you willing to do anything to improve it after the fact? If not, use your resources somewhere else. Okay, so I have a second question for you. I'm going to take a look now and see if you can figure out which of the following is the clearest goal based on the information I've provided to you so far. All right, I'll give you about 10 more seconds. So most of you did choose the correct answer, which is C, increase the number of faculty who teach in the summer. If you take a look at these, when statement A, examine potential funding issues in 2025, that's really a little bit too far out to be a goal. Provide students iPads. Remember that comment I had about destination goals. If your funding falls through, you're not going to be able to provide students iPads. C is the correct answer. And D, invite parents for a campus visit. That's really more of a task, not really something you would strive for or set as your goal. So we're starting to get into the meat of the presentation. Hopefully this is what you've all been waiting for, right? Let's look at defining an outcome versus an objective. Oftentimes these two terms are used interchangeably, but in reality they are different. An outcome is an end result, or I really like referring to it as a consequence. Versus an objective is something that we work toward or strive for. It's more of a goal. When you start to create outcomes, you're going to notice a few themes repeat through this, and you'll see that right now. Outcomes should matter to you. It's the so what factor. Choose an outcome that is important, that you can really, again, back to that passion. They should be reasonable, and they should be measurable. And one area that I have struggled with people regarding outcomes is oftentimes people, like for example, you guys might be working with a subset of students, and you want 100% of your students to go from your program, let's say it's from a high school program, and your goal is to get them into college. Well, in reality, you want 100%. But you have to ask yourself, is that actually reasonable? And sometimes people struggle with moving away from that 100% and setting a more reasonable target. If you are just really set on shooting for 100%, then you could make that your goal And just remember, when you form an outcome statement, that it needs to be truly attainable in a realistic situation. And to always keep things measurable. Outcomes, big difference between the goal and the outcome is that we're going to attach a unit of measurement to it. We have to be able to measure. We're making our goal very specific at this point. So that is, our metric. And outcomes should be consistent with the purpose and the mission, and also with your goals. In terms of the number of outcomes, I always encourage people to start small. You might want to start out with one outcome per goal. That will help you keep things reasonable, and it keeps you from overextending yourself and not being able to complete any of your outcomes. So I added this slide to just kind of further talk about the difference between goals and outcomes. Because I'm thinking you might be wondering to yourself what the difference actually is. Some of the characteristics of goals are that they're more general. They're a general expectation of the outcome. They can still be broad or vague. And when we talked about that destination goal, remember how funding and personnel might impact that, versus the characteristics of an outcome. An outcome is a statement of what someone should be able to do or develop, something like a knowledge, skill, expertise, attitude, or behavior. They should be specific. They should be measurable. Outcomes are sensitive to environmental changes. For example, if your funding falls through or you lose your personnel, that may very well impact your outcome, and it may become unattainable due to that change. One more item to note on goals, that they're not very specific, but they allow us to build an outcome into it. In other words, we start with a goal and then we form our outcome based on our goal. In a sense, we're taking our goal and just making it very specific and measurable. Okay, now I have two questions for you. We're going to look at if you can tell the difference between an outcome or a goal. Now, question 3, is the following example an outcome or a goal? Increase the number of high school graduates going to college. You're also going to need to expand your chat window possibly to see the whole question. That looks like we got quite a few answers, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll call this out here. 95% of you believe that is a goal. So now we're going to go to question 4. Is the following an outcome or a goal? Show a 5% increase in college-going high school students after implementing a college prep program. All right, 100% of you believe that is an outcome. What? Okay, let's see if you're right. Ta-da, you are. Great job. So it looks like you guys are able to tell the difference between the goal and an outcome, with, of course, the big tip is the 5% increase on that second question. That's what really tips you off to that being an outcome. And I actually wanted to mention here, because I felt like maybe someone might argue that on this question first, increase, someone could argue that increase is actually a measurement, but I wanted to point out that in order for it to be measurable, we would actually need a baseline number to go off of. And so that's why it doesn't really count as a metric. So now that you understand the difference between goals and outcomes, let's look at different types of objectives that are commonly used as outcomes. Before I get into this, I'd like to note that all objectives and outcomes have a place and they all have a purpose. And all of them are necessary at different times. But today I'm really going to focus in on a true outcome and a specific type of outcome in a minute. But I want to point out these different types of, and these really are more objectives until you get to the bottom one. But let's start with inputs. Inputs are resources. For example, if I say I need 3 staff in order to fulfill 100 data requests, that's an input. I need something in order to do my job better. So I can actually make that quantifiable. I can make it measurable, but it's still an input. The second item is an output, the types and levels and targets of services. This could include satisfaction. An example of output would be possibly enrollment. Sometimes we call this, butts in seats, or 100% satisfaction on course evaluation. Those are different types of output. And all of you can think of times when that's very important. And these are very common. And we'll get more into that in a minute. But the next step is processes, and this is one I haven't seen as often, but this is about becoming more efficient or possibly finishing intended accomplishment. So for an example, I teach part-time. So let's say by cleaning out 100 emails prior to office hours, I can free up more of my office hours to work with my students. I'm working on becoming more efficient, so I'm changing a process. But as I stated, today I'm really going to focus on outcomes. Outcomes are specific changes in a student or your client, knowledge, skill, expertise, attitude, or behavior. Outcomes state what will happen after an intervention. Oh, sorry, I went too far. So let's look at what makes up an outcome. First, outcomes really should be your preferred objective. We can't always have an outcome, but anytime we can, that's what we should strive for. Outcomes are preferred over inputs and processes. They're seen as the means by which the goal is met. And what I mean by that is that we're essentially turning a goal into an outcome statement. So if we have a goal, possibly our goal is to increase college-going high school students. Well, what do we need to do to make that happen? As it stands, it's just simply a goal. Now we have to get down into the nitty-gritty and state specifically what we're going to do, and that's how we make an outcome. Think about how will you reach your destination? How are you going to reach that goal? Outcomes provide you the means to reach the destination. And we also make goals measurable and achievable. There are different ways to develop an outcome. We can use direct and indirect measures to develop these means. Do we have a question there? Outcomes should be written from the audience's perspective, and I will talk more about that as we get a little bit further. For every goal that you come up with, you should have an outcome to support it, because as I stated a minute ago, if you just have a goal, then you don't really have a way to reach your destination. And I recommend 1 to 3 outcomes per goal and no more. Again, I encourage people to start small, because I really do believe that it's better for you to have one solid, clear, measurable outcome than 15 outcomes that you don't get to or that you just couldn't quite get to fruition. What I have encountered, really there's almost 2 groups of people when working with outcomes, and there's those who are not going to buy into this right now. They're not buying in and, not really invested in it. And then there's another group who get extremely excited. They have been thinking about things, and when they hear this presented and they think, oh, yes, this is awesome, this is great, this is just what I needed, I'm very excited. And so that particular group wants to assess everything. And so if you find yourself in that group, try to kind of take a step back. And what I'd encourage you to do is brainstorm all those wonderful, great ideas that you have, and then focus them in down to the one or three that I've recommended here. So we looked at what makes up an outcome and what it takes to be an outcome. But now let's look at two important but different types of outcomes. You've probably heard the terms direct versus indirect before. Direct outcomes do exactly that. They directly impact the results. They are the consequence that I was referring to earlier. These measures include student products or performances that demonstrate learning has occurred. Indirect measures simply imply that learning occurred, but they lack direct evidence. So let's take a look at some examples here. Some examples of direct measurement. Right off the bat, employment, standardized tests, and specifically here I've listed licensure. For example, if you were to take a person in nursing, so a nursing student goes through college, graduates, and becomes employable. That employment is a direct measure because if that person had not had the education, they would not have been employable in a nursing field. The same for standardized tests. And standardized tests are always, are not very popular, especially in education. But they are a direct measure. Even though they might not be popular, they do directly assess whether learning has occurred. So in this case, the licensure, they are directly assessing whether a nursing student has met specific outcomes. I included on here locally developed tests because I wanted to point out that, and when I say locally developed, I mean institutionally developed, instructor developed. These are your, tests that you create in your classroom. They can be direct if you're assessing a specific content area, such as maybe the mastery of learning how to graph. So they can actually be direct measures. And rubrics are a great way to assist you in getting direct measures as well. And they're similar to the same as the local tests. They're assessing a content area. One second. Okay, so examples of indirect measures. These are oftentimes some of our more popular measures, but satisfaction surveys, for example. Those are actually indirect. And the example that I always like to use with satisfaction surveys, and I'm going to use that with course evaluations too. As I mentioned, I'm an adjunct psychology instructor. And, one of the goals I set for my class is that my students enjoy my teaching. I hope they like my class, and I hope that they walk away satisfied. So at the end of the semester, I ask them through a course evaluation if they enjoyed my class, and I even ask them if they learned something, and I get feedback from my students based on that. So I get feedback on whether they were satisfied and whether they think they learned. But in reality, whether someone enjoyed my class, that doesn't tell me whether they learned anything in my class. And so while I'm happy that they're walking away satisfied, in the end, I'd rather them have walked away learning some material. So that's what makes that indirect. Enrollment increases are also an indirect measure. And the main issue here is that we're not really focused on student learning. We're focused on, increasing, and again, back to the, pardon the expression, butts and seats. And focus groups are another popular but indirect measure of assessment. And I think I touched on this, but just to reiterate, I am not saying that all of these do not have a place. When you do deal with outcomes, people tend to place more emphasis on direct measures. They tend to be more highly regarded. However, there's a time and place for both direct and indirect measures. But much like I said with outcomes, any opportunity you have to use a direct measure, I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of that where possible. So provided here a sample of a direct outcome. After taking a nursing capstone course, 90% of students who pass the capstone course will become licensed nurses through passing the nursing exam. So I actually have two direct measures in here between the licensure exam and the capstone course. Both of those are considered direct. So let's see now if you can identify which of the following is a direct outcome measure. So if you'll take a minute to answer the poll and determine which of the following is a direct outcome measure, you may need to expand your chat window. And if it will help, I'll point out that I cannot tell who answers what, and as far as I know, no one knows specifically who's answering what, if that helps. Okay, 95% of you chose standardized exam given to assess college readiness. And you would be correct. The reasons why A, increasing college goers that's an indirect measure. B, that's our satisfaction survey that I discussed a minute ago. C is a direct measure because it is the standardized exam. And D might give us good information, but it's still an indirect measure through the focus group. Whoops. Okay. We have another one that I didn't set up correctly. So, which of the following is the best example of a direct outcome? If you didn't happen to see the answer. Okay. So it looks like we're still having a few people answer. 100% of you chose after linking high school courses. And you would be correct. So in this particular example, I'm not sure if you have the opportunity to really read through all of the questions because it is a little lengthy, but the first one is actually an input. We're going to obtain 2 new English professors. B is an output. We're going to increase enrollment. C is our actual correct answer. There's a consequence because of our intervention. And D is satisfaction. So C would be the correct answer. So now we're gearing up to actually build an outcome statement. And so let's look at some of the important pieces of an outcome. Outcomes should express what the student will learn, know, or do as a result of the intervention, not what the instructor or service will do for the student. And so I've provided some examples because I know that's kind of difficult to understand right off the bat. And I'm going to read it again for emphasis. Outcomes should express what the student or client will learn, not what the instructor is going to do. So in my example here, my bad example, Kara will provide instruction on how to write an outcome statement. I'm saying what I'm going to do. I'm going to provide instruction on how to write an outcome statement. My good example is that webinar attendees will write outcome statements after Kara provides instruction on how to write an outcome statement. So hopefully you can see the difference between these two. In the second example, I am stating what you will be able to do after my intervention. Uh-oh. Sorry, I have a video pop up. Let's see. I'm going to check the chat real quick and see if everything looks okay. Okay, and I advanced the slides too far. I apologize. And so next up, the next critical component is that student learning should be assessed with an observable, measurable outcome. And all outcomes should be observable and measurable. Verbs such as know and understand are not observable. And I was going to point out that I know that a lot of you are instructors, and so we have to develop syllabi. And in our syllabus, we always say things like students, will demonstrate a knowledge of such and such. And so that would not be an outcome. When we use words like know or understand, we can't actually measure that as it is stated. So we're going to state it in such a way that it becomes observable or measurable. Okay, so now let's test your knowledge. On this one, you are going to need to close expand your window. It's a rather lengthy one. Which outcome reflects what a student will learn or do as a result of the intervention? Okay, just a couple more seconds. 94% of you chose students will demonstrate library knowledge by finding 10 sources for a research paper. And you are correct. As you can see, statement A tells you what I'm going to do. Statement B is more of an input. It's something that we need. We need 2 more instructors. And statement C, this becomes an outcome because we've stated the 10 sources, and we've stated what we're going to do to cause that to occur. Another question. Which of the following better reflects an observable or measurable outcome? All right. 100% thought it was B. And you are correct. B is the only one that actually has a unit of measurement, so that's why that is correct. And as I stated earlier, as you can see in C, students will go to the library more often. That is not actually measurable because we don't have a benchmark. Okay, so now we've gotten to the main focus of today's webinar. This is the actual method that we use at Amarillo College, and every single person at Amarillo College is familiar with this and uses it to develop outcome statements. I would like to give credit where credit is due. We at Amarillo College adapted this from James Madison. They have an A to D model, and we based our model off of theirs. So, and then we've kind of just refined it through the years. We've been using this model for about 6 or 7 years. So, as you take a look at this, we have 5 components, if you will, to forming an outcome statement. The first component is our audience, which we call A. And we just do that to keep things simple. So our audience, that is who are we going to assess. For most of you, this is probably going to be students or possibly teachers. But think about who you want to assess. That's your audience. B is the behavior. This is a behavior that we want to see change. What do we expect of the audience? What change is going to occur? And for those of you who are more scientifically minded, this would be our dependent variable. C, condition. This is our intervention. What intervention are we going to do? That's our condition, and for the scientific folks, that would be more like an independent variable. D is the degree. This is simply our unit of measurement, our metric. And so you can say to what degree the behavior is to be reached, but this is the metric. And E is the evaluation. So this is what evaluation tool are we going to use to measure this? There are, originally we had one formula, but there's actually several ways that you can write an outcome statement. And it seems like every time I do this training with someone comes up with a new and even more creative way to write the actual statement. The formula is meant to be helpful, but sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. So don't get too caught up on that formula right now. I'm going to go through several examples with you. And while you see that the formula changes, two things remain the same. It almost always starts with the condition and ends with the evaluation tool. So the condition is our intervention, what we are going to do to cause the behavior to change. So that's what we're almost always going to start our outcome statement with. Excuse me. So Ginger worked with three Pathways coordinators to look at the projects and assessments that they had going on. And so we've included this slide here to just kind of give you an overview of what San Jacinto is doing. So if you will take a moment to read this slide and just kind of familiarize yourself with what San Jacinto is doing before we go further and look at examples and how to make an outcome statement. And after you've read through this, if you would either write yes over in the chat window or perhaps put a smiley face or some sort of emoticon to let me know that you're ready to move on. Okay, so I'm seeing quite a few people are indicating smiley faces, so I'm going to take that most of you are close to ready to move on. And I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds and advance the slide. Okay. Now we're going to look at a specific example. What I did was, based on the information that Ginger gave me and the types of projects that San Jacinto is working on, I came up with an example of an outcome statement using San Jacinto's information. So as you can see at the top of the slide, we have all those specific components, the A to E components. And if you guys do try to pursue this, after the webinar, if you decide you want to move forward with this and create outcomes using this model, I would strongly suggest that you write out the A to E just as it is on this slide and fill that in first. Save the sentence for last. Just focus on, right now we're going to focus on what is the audience. Who is our audience? So in this particular example, I chose college and high school students as the audience. And thinking about what types of behavior I might want to change, in this case, I might want increased reading scores. Or simply it could be stated, I want the reading scores to change. What condition or what intervention are we going to do to change that behavior? So San Jacinto is pursuing or doing a shared curriculum between high schools and college courses. That would be the intervention. So we would state that as our condition. And the degree, remember, is just a unit of measurement. So in this case, I just randomly chose 20%. And for evaluation, what tool are we going to use? In this case, we're going to use a pre- and post-assessment. Now, after you've identified all the components that you want to use in your model, then we start looking at this idea of the formula or the method to put it into a sentence structure. And so I wrote this formula out, C, comma, A plus B plus B, comma, E. And then I wrote that out below just to kind of help clarify. So first comes our condition, which will be followed by the audience, degree, and behavior. And last will be the evaluation. If you follow that method, you should have an outcome statement that looks or reads similar to this. After incorporating a shared curriculum between high school and college courses, that should say. Okay, yeah. So there we've we've stated our condition. That entire piece of the statement is the condition. Students, there's our audience, will indicate a 20%, there's our degree, increase in reading scores, there's our behavior, as measured by a locally developed pre- and post-assessment. So that's our finally followed up by E, our unit, our tool for evaluating. And if you're feeling a little overwhelmed, that's okay. We've got several examples we're going to go through. So I know everyone loves to diagram sentences, including myself. But when I was thinking about how to best, kind of teach this model through a different delivery method, such as a webinar, I really felt like maybe a visual representation would be helpful. So I attempted my best. It may not be pretty, but I attempted my best shot to diagram this outcome sentence. And the formula, just to reiterate, was started with C, as you can see above. After incorporating a shared curriculum between high school and college students, there's our condition, which is followed by the first box, A, our students, our audience. The next box is the degree, 20%. Then we encountered the behavior, increase in reading scores. And lastly, followed up by our tool for measurement, our evaluation component, as measured by a locally developed pre- and post-assessment. Again, when you're working with this, you write out your A to E. You just focus on each little piece, and then you work on your sentence last. And oftentimes when you do this, it is not going to be grammatically correct. And so those of you who come from an English background, this will drive you nuts for a bit. But after you get it into a workable sentence, then you can, work on the nuances and the grammar and all of that. So we're going to move into another example. But the next example is based on Houston Community College. So take a moment, read through what Houston Community College is doing, and when you've finished, insert a smiley face or find some way to let me know over in the chat window that you're ready to move on. Okay, it looks like a lot of people are ready to move on. I'll give you just about 10, 15 more seconds. Okay, so now we're going to take some of a project that Houston Community College is either working on or may work on in the future, and turn it into an outcome statement. Excuse me, just one second. Okay. Here, we're going to start, like we did before, with our audience. In this case, we're looking at students who test on the bubble of college readiness within math. The behavior that we might want to change is we want them to meet the college readiness standard on Compass. The conditions or the intervention that we are going to do is we're going to supply tutoring on fundamental math skills. So that's our condition, that's our intervention. That's what we're going to do to see that B changes. Our degree or our unit of measurement is that 70% will meet the college readiness standard. And that is, just to point out, that's a number that I just randomly selected. And the E, the evaluation component, is the actual Compass. Well, the Compass score or the Compass instrument will be our evaluation tool. Now, in this example, I swapped up the formula a little bit. And you'll notice that when we go through this sentence. After receiving tutoring on fundamental math skills, so we started with our condition, just as we did in the previous example. Here's where the change happens. We go next with degree. 70% of students who previously scored on the bubble, so there's our degree followed by our audience, will meet the college readiness standard as measured by the Compass test. So in this case, our formula comes out C, comma, D plus A plus B, comma, E. So I'm going to go through that one more time. We start with our condition. After receiving tutoring on fundamental math skills, 70% of students who previously scored on the bubble will meet the college readiness standard. And notice how that's the behavior that we want to see change as measured by the Compass test. And one thing I wanted to know is when you're doing this, remain somewhat flexible. Don't get too caught up in all the, doing that formula exactly perfect, because depending on your degree, it can influence what your sentence needs to read like. But as long as you have those 5 components, the audience, behavior, conditions, degree, and evaluation, you will have a solid outcome statement. Okay, so this is going to be the final school that we look at. So we're going to do just like we've done before. Take an example to read over what Alamo College is doing. And when you are finished, insert a smiley face in the chat window. Okay, so most people, or several people, are indicating that they have read. So I'll give you 10 more seconds. And we're going to look at our last examples here. So we take a look at what Alamo College is doing. In this case, our audience, I wanted to take a different perspective on this one and choose teachers as our audience. So teachers are our audience in this case. The behavior is that we want to change teaching methodologies or incorporate a new learning framework in the classroom. The conditions or the intervention that we're going to do is that we're going to try different teaching methodologies. We're going to place different examples of teaching methodologies onto a website. And the degree is, again, I randomly chose 80%. And so what I specifically said, 80% will use the learning framework. And how's that going to be measured? Through a follow-up survey. And so it could be a website follow-up survey. I used the same formula for Alamo as previously used with Houston, I believe. In this case, we start with our conditions, just as we did in the others. After receiving different teaching methodologies from the Gentex website, 80% is our degree of teachers, our audience. We'll incorporate a new teaching strategy into his or her classroom. There's our behavior, as measured by a Gentex follow-up survey. So just to read it in its entirety one last time. After receiving different teaching methodologies from the Gentex website, 80% of teachers will incorporate a new teaching strategy into his or her classroom, as measured by a Gentex follow-up survey. So hopefully you can see that, it's got all of the our final outcome statement has all of the 5 components that are required to make up an outcome statement. And what we've done is we've taken a project and we've turned it into now a measurable outcome. Now, one thing that I felt was important to note from this example is if you look at this example does not actually measure student learning. So this one would not be a student learning outcome. And I wondered to myself, maybe we could kind of stay along those same lines and come up with something a little bit more of a student learning type of outcome. So you'll notice that the 2 examples from Alamo College focus on the same general topic, but they turn out to be different types of outcomes. In this case, our audience will be students. Our behavior, and I just, this is kind of just something I came up with, is that our students will be able to write a thesis statement correctly. The conditions are that we will implement new teaching strategies shown to increase student writing skills. The degree is 80%. It's going to be measured through a writing assessment rubric. And that sentence comes out, after implementing new teaching strategies, 80% of students will write a thesis statement correctly as measured by a writing assessment rubric. And I wanted to point out that these two slides are related, but what would need to happen is the previous slides, which I'm going to go back to just for a second. In order for student learning to occur, these instructors are going to have to actually implement the different teaching methodologies. So we actually need this outcome to occur in order for the student learning outcome to occur. So I wanted to point that out, how just to give you a different way to think about it, and you can see how the 2 are connected, but one must occur for the next to occur. And in some ways, you could even think of this as maybe more of an advanced level of outcomes. Okay, now it's time to test your knowledge. Which of the following is most likely the condition? All right, looks like most people have answered. And we're at 100% providing instruction. You are all correct. That's wonderful. As you can see, students, that's our audience. 80% 80% B, that's our degree, our unit of measurement, and then C is the pre and post survey. That's our evaluation. So we've reached another reflection slide, and this is more for self-reflection or even just kind of a rhetorical question. If you think about what you're currently doing, could you use this methodology in your current project? And if so, consider just for a moment how you might be able to use this in your current project. Think about who your audience would be. What behavior would you want to see change? So when you reflect on your audience, what do you want to see your audience learn or know or be able to do? And what intervention or condition are you going to implement to make that happen? What is a reasonable degree? What is your unit of measurement? And this is where I talked about people struggle with that, that everyone wants to strive for 100%. And, really, if you're not willing to compromise on that, go with 100% or, whatever that high number is. But we really encourage people to try to set realistic goals. And then, how would you evaluate that? What would you use to evaluate? I thought I would just take a moment to give you some, I guess you could just call these maybe best practices for assessing outcomes. You're always going to want to use a representative sample. And, of course, that would be data from your audience for assessment. And what I mean by this is you can't really cherry pick either your best or your worst, provided on, depending on what you're trying to prove. You need to use a representative sample. Something that I encounter pretty often is a lot of times people say they're going to do things. They say they're going to assess something, and they don't. So I think that's the number one area that, institutions get into trouble with their accrediting agencies. Whatever you say you're going to do with regard to assessment, make sure you do it, or at least be prepared to explain why it was not done. As I mentioned, outcomes are sensitive. They, if you have an outcome, I'll go back to the iPad example and pretend we turn that into an outcome in some way, and you lose all of your funding, then that outcome is no longer realistic. You can't achieve that. So, and that's okay. That happens, and especially in the particular industry that we're all in. So change happens, and just be prepared to explain why it wasn't done, and spend time reflecting on why it wasn't done and how you can either achieve it or formulate a new plan. All outcomes and objectives should be assessed periodically, but they don't have to be assessed at the same time. So this is going to be particularly applicable to those of you who really are, drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak. You really get excited about outcomes, and you're really passionate about your project, and you want to prove that it's working. And that's great. And, if you come up with a lot of different outcomes and you're very passionate, you're not going to let go of any of them, then maybe change the time period. And typically, most of the assessments that I've worked with are done on an annual basis or semi-annual. So, look at ways you can stagger. Maybe you've got 10 total outcomes. Maybe 5 of them could be done every 6 months, and then the other 5 the next 6 months. Just know that they do need to be assessed. You need to, look into them and make sure that you're evaluating or assessing them, but they don't have to be at the same time. And then I just kind of had we're kind of getting toward the end here, so I had a few thoughts that I wanted to express to you all. As I think I mentioned earlier, I was really impressed with the projects that you have going on, and I wanted to just say that some of you have some very clear and straightforward assessment plans, and I think that is wonderful, and I think it's great to be ahead of the curve. But I also think no matter how advanced we are with assessment, it's always wise to just take a step back and think about your goals, think about your assessment plans, and just take a look at them. Are you on the right path? Would any other assessments help you achieve your goals? Make sure your mission and your goals and your outcomes all align. A question that I figured some of you might think about is, how do students perform in college after, say it's an intervention in high school? Then what happens? Thinking about things down the road. And one area that I think is of particular importance is what happens after assessment. When your assessment is all said and done, what happens next? What is your plan of action or your intervention for your assessment? So, you've gone and you've looked into something, and, let's say you've assessed those reading scores, and it turns out that they weren't as positive as you were expecting them to be. So what happens next? I think it's always wise to think about what you will do when you get your results. Because, and I'll talk about this again in a minute, don't assess just to assess. The whole point of assessment is to make improvements. So if you catch yourself in that we're assessing just to assess, then you're kind of missing the whole point to assessment. Also, it seemed like several of you were kind of interested in maybe this professional development component. So I thought I would just throw this in there that, think about ways to measure professional development or to maybe assess professional development. You can look at the quality of the professional development. Maybe that's something that you're interested in assessing. And, by that I mean, are you offering professional development on how to use Excel or on how to, incorporate different teaching strategies into the classroom? So maybe you want to know about how, of what quality your professional development is. Are you interested in quantity, such as the number of instructors who attended the training? Is that of interest to you? Or do you want to look into how it impacts student learning and possibly just overall impact, kind of similar to student learning outcomes? After your professional development, what behavior was changed? Excuse me just a second. In other words, what was the final impact? So after your professional development is over, maybe you want to know if your instructors implemented the teaching strategies that you supplied them with. All of those are different ways to measure professional development, and I'm sure that you've already thought of a million others. And I thought I would also share with you tales of caution. These are just things that I've come across over the years. First, don't get so caught up on assessment that you miss the big picture. As I mentioned before, assessment is about improvement. It's not really about all those fine details. So if you adopt this methodology, don't get so caught up in the sentence structure that you miss what's most important is that you are assessing your project and that you've got a measurement attached to it. You've got a measurement and an intervention and a behavior you're going to change. If you've got those items, then you're good. That's what your focus should be on. Also, along the same lines, don't get so worried about doing everything perfectly that you don't get off the starting block. This is something that I think we run into very often, especially when you try something new. People are a little afraid to get started, and they worry about doing everything perfectly and never really get moving on something. One of the best quotes that I've heard came from Jeff Seibert, who, I don't know if you all are familiar with him, but he's just an assessment guru, if you will. Very, very bright man. And he says, assessment is messy. And, it's something that kind of clung to me, and I liked it. And I agree with him. Assessment is messy. So don't worry about being perfect. Sometimes it's going to get messy. Something that's very important is that it's not really about the process. It's not about that formula. It's about improvements. And I've already said that, I know. But think about what you're doing and let's say your results don't come out as positively as you were hoping. That's okay, because honestly, that is really what assessment is about. Actually, finding out your project's not working is as valuable as finding out it is working. So it tells you where you can implement change. So again, don't worry about the process as much as focus on what you're doing to improve. Being a data person, sometimes, we have to prioritize. All of us in life have to prioritize. Sometimes data and assessments are nice to know. But you have to ask yourself, are they need to know? And it's very easy to get caught up in the nice to know information, but you really have to prioritize your time when you're working with data and assessment, and focus on what you need to know. What do you need to know to prove that your project is important, that it's necessary, and that it's working? And kind of goes back to that administrator question. If you had to explain why your project is valuable to an administrator, what pieces of data or assessment would you need to know in order to do that? And another issue that I run into relatively often is, don't let your inner scientist keep you from meaningful and successful assessment. This is not a dissertation. All of us know that education research is messy. And I've already told you assessment is messy as well. So don't get so focused on statistical significance and different types of statistics and t-tests and multiple regressions and this, that, and the other. If you get too bogged down in that, you're not going to get off the ground with your assessments. So don't let that keep you from, measuring something that's meaningful to you and then being successful with it. Okay, we're wrapping up here. So I've got a few final questions for you. And you may have to minimize your chat window in order to see this. Which of the following items was most useful to you? Still have a few answers coming in. Okay. It looks like most of the people who've answered still have a few. So this is very helpful for me when I'm conducting these trainings to know what is most useful. I appreciate the honesty there. So it looks like a lot of you did appreciate the A to E methodology, and I think we'll have some time here in a minute to answer further questions. So that's very helpful for me. I appreciate you taking the time to fill that question out. One more, and I expect whoever just woke up to definitely answer this one. This is, I believe, our final question. How likely are you to change one of your current assessment measures based on the information provided today? And it looks like just about everybody who's been answering has answered. And it's kind of mixed. There are some who are very likely, a few, looks like most people are likely, and then with a few not quite sure or may not change. And again, thank you for taking the time to answer that. That's extremely helpful for me. Okay, and so being that I'm, goal-oriented and I like to practice what I preach, I like to close this out by saying, kind of wrapping up what I've done today with using the A to E model. After providing training on assessment, 70% of Pathways attendees will change one assessment measure based on the information provided during the webinar as measured by a post-survey of attendees. So, if I wanted to, I would follow up and measure how many of you actually changed. I'd like to point out that this is actually an indirect assessment of my goal. If I wanted to directly assess it, I would need to change. I'd need to survey whether you actually made the change. And I think that concludes the presentation portion.
It's over.
It's over.
So I can now open this up to questions for you if you have specific questions. It looks like several people might be about to fail. So before I do that, let me tell you, those of you who are going to leave, I just want to thank you all for taking the time out this afternoon and spending it with me. If you do come up with questions later, feel free to contact me. I am glad to answer any questions you may have, and I can talk about assessment all day long. So just anytime, information. Until February 1st, I have one set of contact information, and after that time, you can contact me at Our Lady of the Lake, or I've provided my cell phone and personal email address. Okay, so with that said, those of you who want to bail, feel free, and the rest of you, Brown, and I think the best way to do this would be have a question, maybe to insert a smiley face, and then I'll try to monitor that and make sure to call on you.
This is Ginger. Kara, thank you so much for this presentation.
Will be available, and Ginger will need to be the one to answer that.
Yes.
I'm not sure if she's able to speak just yet.
I am on the call, and we have taped this, what an ancient word, taped. We've recorded this presentation, so as soon as it's edited and available for distribution, I'll do that. I'll send it out to all of you, as well as to the others who were invited to the presentation today. Just for logistics, everyone is sort of live on the conference call now, so if you have some background noise in your office or at your home, please do your best to minimize that while we open it up for questions. I see Laura Arzola has made a comment. Kara, could you address that really quickly?
I apologize. I'm trying to figure out who this is. Somebody has their video open, and I can't tell who it is, but if that person would close their video, then I would be able to see more of the comments. I can only see the very last chat item.
Okay, well, how about I read Laura's comment to you? Okay. Standardized testing is a poor way to assess students' understanding after reading a passage. The dependence on standardized testing has resulted in my English students coming to college with weak skills. So can you recommend another way to assess reading?
I think I heard part of that. So it sounds like there was, that standardized testing is not a great way to assess reading skills. Is that the gist of what you said?
Yes.
Okay. And I have heard that from others as well. So, and when I mentioned standardized testing earlier, I should just reiterate that it is simply a direct measure. It is not always or oftentimes the best measure. So with regard to reading skills, I have to kind of reflect on this a minute. I'm trying to think of some ways that we do it currently. I think our current assessment, with everyone I've worked with on reading, is locally developed, or actual instructor.
Oh, gracias, bye.
Wait.
help answer that question?
Yeah. Linda is there. Linda P. Campbell, Laura, Susan.
So what is
Kara, could you join us again?
Okay, thank you. I think that will be helpful to to do it without this background noise. Thank you for that comment, Linda. Yeah, certainly, from my perspective, we could, start at a later time in the future. So does anyone else have any additional questions or any questions on the A to E methodology? If you do have a question, please type it in the chat window. As you may have noticed, that everyone is muted at this time. It looked like someone was typing, but it's gone away. So again, I'll just mention, if you do come up with questions after the fact, I'm glad to answer those. We've been, like I said, using the A to E method for several years and had pretty good success with it. So let me know if I can help you out along the way. If there are still people listening in, you guys are you're probably assessment experts and just don't realize it. With regard to your content, no one knows that better than you do. So it's just a matter of working with someone to kind of help formulate what you already know into a measurable outcome. Thank you. I appreciate that one. Thank you, Laura.
Kara, why don't we stick around for another 5 or 10 minutes and see if any questions come up, and then we can close out.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Pam. Ginger, I don't know if you see that one, that Mike or John and Mike is having a problem saving to the computer. Okay, you do see it. I'd also add, for those of you who are still kind of hanging out. One thing about the A to E model is that I'd like to challenge you to go and try to create one on your own and see if you're able to do it. And if not, shoot me an email or give me a call and I'll walk you through it. But if you wait too long, that it may be hard to kind of remember all of the nuances of it. Yes, that is fine with me. Ginger may want to chime in, but it's fine with me if you'd like to share your file.
Hi, Juan Carlos. It's Ginger. I think this is my second time taking the seminar with Kara, so I'm hopeful that I can help you work through for the Pathways work, develop a measurable outcome. But if we working together, if we sort of hit a snag, I can ask Kara if she'll have time, but since she's starting a new job in February, it might be a challenge for her to reserve time for us.
And just to chime in, either way is fine. You guys, if you need my assistance, I'm happy to help, and I think it's great for you to revise your goals and outcomes and, kind of give it a shot and see how that works for you. But I will also say that Ginger is extremely sharp with this. So, and after 2 times, I think she's ready to start doing this presentation too.
Kara, I think we've probably got the last of our questions. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know creating this presentation for a webinar versus doing it face-to-face was not as easy as we thought it would be, but I think you did a wonderful job, and I really appreciate your time.
I thank you for the opportunity, and, really, I enjoyed it, and it helped me think about things differently. So you'll have to let me know how the feedback is on it, and I appreciate you reaching out, and let me know if I can do anything else.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.